Okay, so it's months after Christmas, but I still felt the need to make this because I'm so angry at this movie. And what is the movie in question, you may ask? Well, just a little film on Netflix called A Christmas Prince, the Royal Baby, but don't be fooled. The baby is purely incidental to the greater storyline, which, though not about race, does feature some prominent non-white characters, and made me wonder just how exactly a Hallmark-style Christmas romance film would handle race, especially in a fictional nation. I wasn't very impressed.
Quick disclaimer, it's not that there haven't been non-white people in the Christmas Prince franchise before, they've just been traditionally sidelined, either as black best friend or eccentric South Asian party planner who only speaks in the third person. So, standard side character tropes from holiday movies. Look, it's not just the freshly fallen snow in these movies that's super white. The point is, these aren't so much characters who made an impact in the plot as much as addendums to Christmas Queen Amber's storyline. You kind of wonder what Melissa does when she's not with Amber, because the way we're introduced to her, as a friend and coworker, makes it hard to imagine her having a life outside of Amber at all. Sahil is a bit easier to imagine without the context of Amber. He's just planning parties for rich people, but even then, his job assisting other people means we see him mostly as a plot device and obstacle in the way of Amber's wish for a low-key wedding, instead of as an actual person in the second movie. And no, I don't think talks in the third person and is a flamboyant artist who can't take critique is enough to build a whole personality. Another disclaimer, I'm not going to be talking much about the LGBTQ rep in this series, though I will mention that the second movie really implied Andy, Amber's gay best friend, and Sahil were going to get together, and they kind of do, as partners in Sahil's planning business in this movie. No hint of them ever feeling anything for each other beyond being workmates. Back to the main topic, though. So, I don't know if they were receiving a lot of criticism about their treatment of Sahil and Melissa in the last two films, or if they received a lot of flack in general for how white the fictional European, quasi-Scandinavian nation of Aldovia really is, but this movie goes out of its way to put non-white characters in both the center and sidelines of the story, which I wouldn't mind if they had, done a better job. For example, compare crowd shots from the last two movies with this one from the third movie. Where were all these Aldovians of color hiding for the last two movies? Actually, let's not discuss the implications of that statement. God knows this movie never will. Keep in mind, though, that in this suddenly more diverse population, there's still a white royal family in Aldovia, and while we don't see any of the Penglians besides Lynn, the royal attaché, and the Penglian royal family, including one important ancestor, we get the feeling based on those people that the Penglians might all be East Asian. The implications of this are pretty damning. A nation made up of only one race can have its monarchy represent that race, but a multi-ethnic nation, like Aldovia apparently is, can only have a white monarchy to represent them. While this is mostly true to real life thanks to colonial history, it does make me wonder about Aldovia's own ties to colonialism in this alternate reality, which is not something that really adds to my enjoyment of this film. But to get a little more into fictional colonialism, let's jump right back with the Penglians. We see three members of this family: the archaic, quasi-Mongolian but Japanese and/or Korean named Prince Jun, along with King Tai and Queen Ming, who are apparently based on their names Chinese-coded. We also have Lin, whose name is a homophone for the word Lin, meaning forest, a relatively common Chinese surname. There's two ways to interpret the name discrepancies here, one being that Panglia was super Japanese influenced or even colonized by Japan during the time of Prince Jun, around 1419, way before the Japanese Empire had any formally colonized territories, and then later on became Chineseified before 2019, or Sinicized, if you want to get technical about it. The alternative is that the filmmakers didn't really research or give a single crap about East Asian naming conventions as different from each other, and, well, it's clearly not what happened. Also, can we take a minute to talk about this map the filmmakers gave us? Based on what we know about the Penglians, they've not only been culturally influenced and/or colonized by Japan and/or China, they were able to be influenced by these countries all the way from their location in real-world Georgia. This is pretty impressive, along with the fact that Aldovia has eaten everything from the Czech Republic to Kosovo. Belgravia, which is a district in London, has now become a nation that we're probably going to see in another sequel, and it's erased Poland, Latvia, Belarus, and some of Ukraine from the historical record. There's a whole host of ways how having Georgia Sinicized or Japanicized and putting all those nations into one with Aldovia and Belgravia would have affected or seriously changed world history, but we honestly don't have time to kick around that thought exercise. Thankfully, neither does the movie, which is going to ignore the entire reframing of Europe this represents. So, having established that the writers threw their responsibility for research out the proverbial window, let's get on to character treatment. Basically, this presumably majority East Asian nation that has taken the place of Georgia in the historical record had Prince Jun, the curiously Japanese-named prince, sign a treaty with an Aldovian royal during a war in 1419. After that, the royal families had to get together every 100 years to sign the treaty again, otherwise they went right back to war. Imagine if that was how every treaty worked. Not just that if you break the terms of the treaty, the war begins again, but that if you don't keep rehashing the whole thing over and over again, you just go back to war. It's not a comment on race and its treatment in the film, but it's a damn silly way to make this treaty still at all relevant to the modern day.
So apparently, ancient Aldovian guy's wife might have been cheating on him with Prince Jun at some point, and so Prince Jun maybe, or maybe didn't, poison the ancient Aldovian guy, and it's a whole to-do that doesn't really matter in the scheme of the movie. It's just there so you can view the Penguins with the appropriate amount of suspicion. Because yellow peril never really goes away. It just sort of changes to fit with the times.
The idea of yellow peril also follows Lin, who even the King of Penglia admits really runs the show of the whole Penglian monarchy. Assumed to be scheming with the king's cousin Simon secretly, Simon who, despite having had his redemption arc in the second movie, did try to usurp the throne in the first one, she immediately comes off as shady, and when the treaty goes missing, you have the feeling she might be pulling the strings behind its disappearance. With Queen Ming, we get a mixture of two stereotypes. In her first appearance, there's an element of the Dragon Lady archetype, basically an Asian woman who is domineering and powerful, but also cold, ruthless, and emotionless, willing to step over the innocent white woman to get her way. Unlike most Dragon Ladies, however, because this is a Hallmark-style romance film, Queen Ming isn't using her sexuality to try and get what she wants, and to her credit, she does defrost over the course of the film. The sexuality aspect of the Dragon Lady actually ends up somewhere else, on Lin, the only other Asian woman in the main storyline. While it's not exactly red-hot, steaming sexuality, her flirting and teasing with Simon, all in front of his new girlfriend Melissa, combined with her seemingly plotting something with him behind everyone's backs, seems to indicate that she's using her charms to coldly lure Simon back into going against the throne. Even though this is proven false later on in the story, the filmmakers were very confident in using Yellow Peril and the Dragon Lady archetype as shorthand with this Asian character, in order to make sure the audience were suspicious about her. Basically, they relied on a cultural stereotype to convince the audience that maybe it was the Asian lady who was behind the crime after all. Back to Queen Ming's other stereotype, though, that of the tradition-obsessed Asian matriarch. A lot of films that deal with the East-West dynamic deal with dichotomies. If the West is modern, the East is backward. If the West is innovative, the East is traditional. As such, characters who are Asian are often presented as overly protective of tradition, like Queen Ming in her refusal to sign the treaty along with Amber, when traditionally only the kings of Aldovia and Penglia are the ones to sign it every 100 years. Though the film does point out that Queen Ming may just not really want credit for all she does, and that's why she's upholding the tradition of not wanting to sign the treaty at all, the main conflict between the two women and the cultures they represent is the same old dichotomy of modernity versus tradition, and, in stereotypic fashion, the face of modernity can only come to us white. It's not awful, but it is kind of tiring, especially when there's so much more to people than following their cultural traditions. I mean, during Europe's Dark Ages, the Middle East was developing medical techniques, China was inventing gunpowder, and India was building the world's first iron pillar, just to name a few. It's not all about traditions and how restrictive Asian societies are, and it doesn't have to be that way when people keep writing about them.
I don't think the writers and the showrunners of A Christmas Prince, The Royal Baby were really trying to play into these tropes and stereotypes. I genuinely think, in their own way, they were just trying to make the cast of this franchise more diverse, which in and of itself isn't a bad idea. The problem is that they got caught up in some uncomfortable stereotypes that are embedded into the cultural consciousness. That can happen to anyone if you're writing about someone whose experience is very different from yours in a cultural and racial sense. So, piece of advice and moral of the story, if you're going to do that, you should at least do some research and not write people just as representatives of their culture or anything like that. Because people are more than their cultures, and you should represent them as people.